Welcome to this fourth video looking at Davinci Resolve 15. Today we'll be looking at Fusion, and this is going to serve as a sort of introduction to Fusion, what it is, how it's a bit different to the rest of the package in some ways, but that it can be hugely powerful once you learn to think in the same sort of way. So I thought it might be interesting to have a look at what Fusion actually is. Until fairly recent versions of Davinci Resolve 15, Fusion to me was always standalone software. I used Davinci Resolve to do editing, but when I wanted to do any sort of special effects or graphics or things like that, I turned to other packages like Fusion. So if you look at the Fusion website, and yes, Fusion is still available as a separate package to buy independently, or yes, there is, like Resolve again, a free version. And if you just scroll down the website, you can look at the kind of jobs that Fusion's kind of pitched at. So they talk about advanced visual effects, 3D, VR, and motion graphics. Different projects that it's been used on, motion picture films, TV series, that sort of thing. So in terms of its pedigree, Fusion, or at least the standalone version, is really right up there. In the right hands, Fusion is capable of doing really quite impressive things. And like I said, a bit like Resolve, there is a version that you can buy for $300, which is the studio version with everything unlocked, or there is actually a really good workable Fusion 9 to download separately as well. This here is Fusion, the standalone package, and you'll notice that it looks, apart from the grey, not a lot like Resolve. It's really quite different. Viewers are kind of slightly reminiscent of the edit page, maybe the media, maybe the main timeline, but all of a sudden you've no tracks or anything up here. The inspector kind of panel here, that's kind of similar, but apart from that, there's not a lot to tie it to Resolve. But before we look at Fusion actually inside of Resolve, I just wanted to talk for a couple seconds about layers. This is Photoshop. You may be familiar with it, or you may be not. For many people, this is the #1 graphics package for editing images. It's even got its own verb, so yeah, it's kind of the standard. And in Photoshop, it uses layers. These three objects here and the background are all independent layers. If this feels too dumbed down, I promise there is a reason for talking about this. Effectively, what's happening is you're looking from the top down. So we're seeing ellipse 2 first, then ellipse 1, then rectangle. And that's what we're seeing here. Ellipse 2 on top of ellipse 1 on top of the rectangle. If I change the orders of ellipse 2 and ellipse 1, suddenly ellipse 1 is now the top. I'm seeing that as the topmost objects. Lots of different packages use this kind of layers concept. And in fact, here in Resolve, in the edit page, we've kind of got layers here as well, don't we? We have video tracks, video 1 and 2. You can see that there is my lower third. That is a layer on top of the video behind. So if we were to swap that around, let me just drag this up. Let me just copy it, in fact. Of course, now that copy of that bit of video is now on top of the lower third, and you can't see anything at all. So that's kind of like a layer as well. We're looking down from above. So that layers concept that I just talked about for a couple seconds there, that doesn't directly exist inside of Fusion, and as such, it can be a little bit weird to first kind of get your head around how you should be approaching it. Also, as a slight aside, a friend of mine who does games videos as well, he saw some of the tutorials I've made recently, he had a look at Fusion, and he kind of went, that looks really impressive, the website's, full of all these big names and impressive things, but really, what kind of job am I going to use that for? It's a perfectly valid and really good question. So today, we're going to use the Fusion page to actually create some custom titles for this project. So let's say, maybe at this point here where we're flying down, maybe we have some custom titles that appear in the middle of the screen. The way the Fusion works inside of Resolve is whatever the playhead is underneath, when you go over to Fusion, that is what is going to be edited. So there we go, finally, welcome to Fusion inside of Resolve, and you'll notice some things are looking kind of different. It looks a little bit like the standalone Fusion that we looked at earlier on. There are some kind of legacy ideas still floating around here as well. For instance, middle mouse is used to move around in the different windows here, and in fact in this timeline here in the middle as well. But what you probably noticed is these two nodes here and this line in between them. And as I say nodes, I should probably actually define what I mean by a node. Well, inside of Fusion, a node is basically like a small job or an operation. In this case here, we have two nodes. We have media in 1 and media out 1. Why do we have those? Well, because we came from the edit page. This node here is loading the media from the edit page, which is that clip that we selected. And media out is taking the results of our Fusion project and then putting it back onto the edit page. So if we wanted to do something to this clip here, it would happen in between those two nodes. So our whole project is going to exist between those two nodes, from loading in that background there to rendering it or passing it back out to the edit page. And maybe we should talk about viewers here as well. Although this may look like the edit page, and I'll hop back, where this viewer here is for kind of getting media ready and this viewer here is for the main timeline, in Fusion, that's not quite how things work. In Fusion, these two viewers are basically whatever you want them to be. You can just have one viewer or you can have a couple of viewers, and you can basically view at any point during the flow of nodes that you've created. So again, what does that mean? Well, at the moment, the reason why we're seeing this is because on this media out here, you see this little tab. There are two circles. One is a white circle that represents number 2. So that is what we're seeing in viewer number 2. If I click on this, I've got a couple of ways of putting it up here. I can either click and drag it directly in, then it'll appear, or I can also press 1 on my keyboard. If I press 1, it'll appear in viewer 1. So you press a node, press either 1 or 2, it'll appear there or there. So why don't we actually make some changes? That'd be a good start. We have a large number of tools here that are quickly available as buttons, but also if you look in the effects library here, under tools, we have a massive number of tools also up here as well. So let's start with something easy. Why don't we make this look a little bit more stylized, maybe kind of blur it a bit to make it look a bit more kind of dramatic. Well, this tool here is called Blur. So if I just click on it, what happens? Well, a blur node appears. This blur node you can place anywhere you want, and at the moment you can see nothing's really changed. If I zoom into 100%, you can see that there's really nothing changed to this at all. What we need to do is we need to get that blur node as part of our whole flow. And as we know, this is going from media in to media out, and you can see this little arrow. It starts and finishes. I'm just going to take the end of that arrow and point it to the blur. Okay, what just happened? Well, as we know, media out is this viewer here, but media out now no longer has anything pointed at it. Media in is still the first viewer. So we've actually broken this chain. What we actually need to do is take the output of the blur and pass it out to media out 1. And what you can see now is we have a slightly blurry output. If we click on the node, a bit like the inspector panel in the edit window, we have the details of that particular node. We can take the blur size and adjust it to whatever we want. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to turn it so that it's only affecting the blue channel. So red and green are going to be left alone. And I think, well, let's turn them back on so we can see what it's going to look like. Maybe it's like a kind of flare left to right. Make it only affect left to right. That looks kind of cool. Make it only apply to blue. And we've got a kind of stylized look. Let's say that we're happy with that. So again, this viewer here, we're looking at the footage coming in from media in 1. And this viewer here, we're looking at the footage coming out back to the timeline in the edit page via media out 1. And in between we now have this blur node. But like I was saying before, it's all about the flow between these nodes. You can arrange these in any order you want, it doesn't matter. You could do whatever you want with these nodes. The point is that these arrows, and there's a progression between these nodes, that's what makes the difference. So what do we do next? Well, how about some text? A text node. A text editor in Fusion is really quite good. It'll allow us to do a whole bunch of different things. What we're going to do is we're going to type the word Apex. Why are we doing that? Well, if you don't know already, this game is called Apex Legends. So we're just going to have some text that says Apex on the screen as our titles. And this isn't connected, but what we can still do is if I press 1 on it, that appears in viewer 1. Great. Maybe we make that text a bit bigger. There we go. Now we hit a bit of a snag because we need this text to be on top of the output of our blur. So we know it has to go before that because that saves it back to the edit page. We want it to be after the blur because we want it to go on top of it here. And of course we don't have layers. This was why I talked about layers at the start. That whole concept of a layer, it doesn't really exist here. Because all that we're interested in are these lines and this process and this flow through our nodes. What we need is something called a merge node. Now, a merge node has two major inputs. And if you mouse over these little triangles at the side here, you'll see one says background and one says foreground. We're going to take our blur output and put it into the background of merge 1. And now connect the output of that merge to media out so that everything stays connected. And now we have this. We have a foreground. Let's connect the text into the foreground there. And lo and behold, there is our apex on top of our blur. And if we in fact go back to the edit page now, there we go. It's saving back to the edit page. I hope you agree that that's quite a simple concept. I'll just run through that one more time. We're bringing the footage in from the edit page. We're blurring it here. We have some text that says apex. And that text is being applied onto the input from the blur using this node called merge. And if you click on this node, there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can adjust and lots of different things there. And then that merge is being passed from there to media out, and media out saves it back to the edit page. So although Fusion is capable of working on motion pictures and TV shows and all that kind of stuff, that is the main concept of what you have to think about. And it is different from Photoshop, it is different from After Effects, it is different from a whole bunch of other packages. But because it comes at things from a totally different angle, you can find that it can be, as well, incredibly powerful and more suited to do some kinds of tasks. So that text is looking a little bit lonely. Why don't we find it a nice coloured box to sit on? If we wanted to do that, how would we go about it? Something called a background node, and although that sounds obviously like a background, just think of these as colour nodes, if you will. Let's give it a kind of bright orange. With that selected, I'm going to press 1. And that's now appeared in viewer 1. So that's our background node. But that background node is covering the whole frame. You'll notice 1920 by 1080, that is a full 1080 frame. If we were to merge that, and in fact, let's show that right now. We'll take our background, we'll merge it onto our timeline, and of course the whole thing turns orange. Why? Because that is now in the foreground, and it's being applied on top of our footage, which is being blurred. So that's clearly not going to work. You'll notice that most nodes have a little blue triangle that represents a mask. So you can define what areas of that node are actually seen. So what does that mean? Well, with that selected, here are a bunch of quick ways of creating nodes. Say a rectangle, an ellipse, a polygon, and a B-spline. These basically allow you to create custom shapes. But what we're going to do is, easiest thing here is just to select rectangle. So now we have a rectangle mask, because it's a blue line into a blue triangle, into the background. What we could really do with is our text to be on top of our orange rectangle here. So let's disconnect that, and let's use another merge node. And although I actually moved that text above here because that's visually what it's going to be, but in actual fact it really doesn't matter where this is happening. I create another merge, my background will become the background of the merge, the text will become the foreground of the merge. Let's just drag that merge up into here, there we go, that's our result. That's exactly what we want. Take the output of this merge and attach it to our main footage, and lo and behold, it now all appears. If we click on our rectangle mask, we have some controls over width and height and things like that. Kind of good with the width of that here. Maybe drop the height a little bit. Maybe show it just covers those interface elements. That's pretty good. But of course, Fusion isn't about just making static things like this that are just placed on top of each other. Fusion can also do animation as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open the Keyframe Editor. The Keyframe Editor allows us to edit keyframes to animate objects inside of Fusion. If you're unfamiliar with keyframe editing, basically it's saying I want this object to do a specific thing at a specific time. And then the software interpolates or tweens between those two keyframes. You'll see what I mean in a second. Actually, what I'm going to do is Rather than edit some of the parameters here, what I like to do is add something called a transform node. So if you have a node selected and then you select one of these ones, it'll appear in that flow. You don't always have to connect it manually yourself. With this transform node, we get tools to transform or move around our graphics. So let's say on this clip, as we're going in, maybe we want the graphics to appear, say, around about there. We're dealing with the orange rectangle at the moment. So what I'm going to say is create a keyframe for the center at this point. Let's go back a few frames. In fact, let's go back 60 frames. Why 60 frames? Well, we know this is a 60 frames per second project. So if we go back 60 frames, that is 1 second. All we're going to do is we're going to take this little handle here and drag it off screen. So what's that done? Well, you can see we have 2 keyframes now. We have one where it's off screen, and if we adjust the playhead, another one where it comes in. Let's do something similar for the text now. I'm going to click on this transform node. You can see it's got a little thing there. That means it's been animated or has keyframes. I'm just going to Control C and then Control V. Wire that up in between the merge. At the moment, that is a copy of that one. But rather than going off that side, you know what? Text is going to come in from the opposite side. It doesn't matter how far text goes off. Let's just put it, say, right about there. So now our clip starts. We're flying down, and if I just deselect everything so we get rid of those handles, those interface things, these things slide in. And of course, using these transform nodes, we could do lots of different things. We could adjust angles. You could do any kind of animation you want. Let's just go back to the edit page and see how that's looking. I'm just going to right click on this. I'm going to tell it to cache the Fusion output. Let's just mute all those channels and give the computer time to cache those frames. But we're kind of getting it now. There's our animation. And the first thing that grabs me about that is that the animation, the actual motion in the animation, is quite sudden. It's quite linear. There's no acceleration or deceleration. It's just constant motion and then snapping to a stop. So how can we solve that? Well, let's go back to Fusion. Rather than using the Keyframe Editor, we're going to use another editor. Close Keyframe and open the Spline Editor. So the Spline Editor is kind of like the Keyframe Editor, but it shows the motion in a sort of graph form. So perhaps this doesn't look much more different to the Keyframe Editor, where we have that kind of small graph there. In actual fact, the Spline Editor is a really powerful thing to learn. This is how you can tune the motion of your animations, and it can really make all the difference to how professional things look. At the moment, we are viewing the splines, or the animation of the 2 transform nodes. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to select what is in fact 2 keyframes. It's both of them from the 2 different transform nodes. And I'm going to change how this animation looks. So what does that mean for our animation? Well, before it was linear. Before there was no acceleration, no deceleration. It just traveled in a straight line and stopped dead. Now, this animation is going to start off fast and then slow stop. So much more organic motion, much more eye-pleasing motion. And if we just scrub through now, starts off fast. And you can see things slowing to a halt. And if we go back to the edit page, we can view that in real time. Just let it cache and let it render out of Fusion. There you go. I think you'll agree that's a much nicer motion. So I'm just going to make one final change here. I'm going to select both those transform nodes. You'll notice that now, if you have multiple nodes selected, multiple controls, so that's the original and the copy we made. I'm going to go into the second part of this inspector panel, and I'm going to enable motion blur. Now, if you're coming from a gaming background, and this is the first time you've heard the words motion blur outside of games, inside of gaming, motion blur is not looked on in a very favourable light. Perhaps important to talk about what motion blur actually is. Although people who play games think of frames as single moments, the actual concept of a frame is of a fraction of a second. This project is 60 frames a second, so it's 1 second divided into 60 tiny little segments. So if something moves fast within one of those segments, it will not be sharp, it will be slightly blurry. Particularly for motion graphics, you'll find that things look a lot nicer and a lot more pleasing to the eye and a lot less harsh if you apply motion blur. So with motion blur now enabled, let me enable it on the other one as well. We zoom in. We have some quality issues. Let's ramp up the quality there. We're okay at 10. How's the other side looking? There we go. So because that is fast moving at the start, it should be blurry to our vision. And that's gonna go kind of against what people who play games think. But believe me, without motion blur, this could look quite harsh, even at 60 frames a second. This now obviously takes longer to render now, because of the motion blur being enabled. As things slow down towards the end of this animation, the effect of the motion blur that we're seeing is obviously lessened and lessened until right at the end of the animation, you're not seeing the motion blur at all. Let's just go back to edit and see this in real time. So obviously having to do a lot more work now. So there we are. I think you'll agree that that looks a lot smoother now. Not only the motion is a lot more appealing, but the motion blur at the start, you don't notice how blurry it is, but you do notice how smooth everything feels. It sells it as being a much more kind of refined animation. And of course this is an incredibly simple animation. A couple of moving elements, but it's entirely under your control. If you wanted to go back to Fusion now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to disable motion blur on both of these transform nodes. But if you came back and you said, you know what, they don't like the rectangle, whoever we're making this for, they don't like the rectangle. What are we going to use instead? Let's make a polygon mask. Because we're using nodes, because we're not tied to layers, because it's all just about this flow and what things are connected to what and how, it means that we can just go back and change that mask easily. We just created a sort of blob, and now that's part of the animation instead. It makes Fusion a incredibly powerful tool. So if you want to do custom titles, if you want to do custom credits, there are even things of 3D that can do 3D text. You can have cameras flying through text, all kinds of things, all by wiring these nodes up in the way that you want. But of course, that's an extremely simple animation. But if we look at something like my introduction video, this was made in part in Fusion and in part in After Effects as well. You can sort of play with time and offset and displacement and different effects, where you're just keyframing bits of animations and then layering things on top of it. So if you wanted to create a custom logo for your channel, if you wanted to create custom titles for your video, once you get used to working in Fusion, you can actually get things up and running really quite fast. But give it some time. If you've ever wanted a tool like After Effects under your belt, then give this a try. It's free, it's part of Resolve. If you do like it, then go to the website and download the free separate version as well. But just before I end up this video, let's just see if we can do something a little bit crazy. Let's take off that polygon mask. Let's reattach the original thing mask. In fact, let's delete that polygon mask. So this represents this whole animation here. Let's just copy it and paste it. So what do we have now? We have 2 copies of the animation that we just made. Let's go over to Keyframe Editor. Oh, close the Spline Editor, because we're running out of space here. Let's set it to only show selected tools, which is these 2 here. So let's just drag these out a couple more frames. So what have we just done? The 2 parts of that animation, the text coming in and the box coming in, we've created a copy of that, and we've just delayed it slightly by a couple of frames. So what does that mean? Well, let's create another merge node. Go back to the Spline Editor. And this is the merge node that's combining the two parts of the animation together now. And let's just say, let's put it to overlay. This merge node selected. The blend is how much of one side of the merge is applied over the top of the other. So if I say at this point here, it's fully blended, but by the time the animation finishes, which is there, it's completely gone. So if you didn't follow that last bit, I don't blame you. This side here was our original animation. I copied that to be over here. We essentially had two animations running at the same time. I then made this animation run just slightly behind. I just shifted the animation slightly later. Then this merge node here is what combines those two animations together. I set the merge node to overlay to get a kind of graphic style. You can set them to anything you like. Color burn, color dodge. Let's just stick with overlay. And now what I've done is I added another little animation so that at this point now, this blend value, which is how much of our second animation is applied over our first animation, slowly blends out until by the time it stops, everything's back to normal. I've just gone back and set the motion blur to be back on. So it's taken a couple of minutes just to cache that stuff coming out of Fusion back on the edit page. But that's our finished effect now. That's our completely custom title animation for our video. It's taken us a little while to make, but once you get used to using Fusion, once you get used to dealing with nodes, once you get used to thinking in that way, you'll find that you can put these things together really quite quickly. If you come from After Effects or any other kind of motion graphics program, and you're used to keyframing, you'll be even faster. If that last bit confused some of you, then I don't blame you at all. If you're brand new to this whole thing as a concept, I can imagine that be a little bit bewildering to all of a sudden just copy a random whole group of things and then start wiring them back together in different ways. It shows you how adaptable Fusion can be. But even if you just think of it as this being the original animation, and you're getting some of those concepts together. So have a try yourself. If you do have any comments, please do leave them in the comment section below. If there is demand for me to do more looks at Fusion and have a go at different things, maybe even do some stuff in 3D, I'm absolutely up for that if that's what people want. If you have enjoyed this video, please do leave me some feedback, a thumbs up, even hit subscribe if you want to help support and grow the channel. My next video will be looking at the color page, and color being arguably one of the main reasons for Davinci Resolve being famous. So I do hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Take care.